Latitude Media, covering the new frontiers of the energy transition.
From Latitude Media, this is Open Circuit. I am Stephen Lacey, and it's just me today. Jigger and Catherine are going to be back with me next week. And as we start to wind down the year, we're in that seasonal reflection mode. And so in that spirit, we've got a bit of a different episode this week. We just passed the 3-year mark of when ChatGPT dropped on the world, which launched this commercial arms race for AI dominance. And it's become a magnetic force, some would call it a black hole, for capital, the workforce, and media attention. And the narrative of the last few years, driven by figures like Sam Altman, was intoxicatingly simple. Large language models are the on-ramp to general artificial intelligence, and the only bottleneck to getting there is scale. Just feed the machine more data, more chips, and more electricity, and it will get smarter.
Look, I think compute is going to be the currency of the future. I think it will be maybe the most precious commodity in the world. And I think we should be investing heavily to make a lot more compute.
In the race to build these LLMs, the top tech companies have collectively teed up more than $1 trillion in capital expenditures to expand their computing power. And obviously, seeing an opportunity there, utilities are planning another $1 trillion to upgrade the grid over the next 3 years, much of it to serve the appetite of AI data centers. Investors are cheering both parties along. And the entire logic of this multi-trillion-dollar leg of the race has been based on this belief that scale is the determining force for building human-level intelligence. But 3 years in, this narrative, at least for LLMs, is showing cracks. Ilya Sutskever, the co-founder and former chief scientist at OpenAI, was on the Dwarkesh podcast about a week ago. This is one of the most influential AI experts in the world, and he questioned the idea of a scaling law for large language models.
From 2012 to 2020, it was the age of research. Now, from 2020 to 2025, it was the age of scaling. Because people say, this is amazing, you gotta scale more, keep scaling, the one word, scaling. But now the scale is so big, like, is the belief really that, oh, it's so big, but if you had 100x more, everything would be so different? Like, it would be different for sure. But like, is the belief that if you just 100x the scale, everything would be transformed? I don't think that's true.
You don't have to be an AI expert to intuitively understand what Sutskever is saying here. If you use these tools, you can feel it yourself. I'm a heavy user of LLMs. I love them. I use them for research, for testing ideas, basically everything that kind of gets me to the writing or decision-making process faster. And even if they never get better from here, they've brought me a ton of efficiency that I never could have imagined a few years ago. And there's no doubt these tools are getting better. For example, when Gemini 3 was released last month, it felt like a pretty significant leap. But LLMs still suffer from these common problems, generic writing, hallucinations, the absence of real understanding. And even after $1 trillion in training runs in GPUs, we're still a long way from general intelligence. 3 years after promising a rapid march to AGI, Sam Altman has softened his tone and repositioned ChatGPT as more of a social media-like engagement product than an emergent mind. We are in the middle of a major vibe shift. So why am I bringing all this up? This is an energy podcast, not an AI podcast. Well, if scale alone doesn't get us to this promised intelligence, at least for LLMs, what happens to the energy and infrastructure projections built on that assumption? The energy industry has been completely sucked into this AI moment. And in some respects, a lot of the decisions being made right now, the planning, the procurement, the resource forecasts are running on vibes. Utilities are getting overwhelmed with speculative data center proposals that may or may not materialize, but those requests still drive up load projections. And those projections become the foundation for 20 or 30-year investments in the grid, in generation, and in rates. People are making monumental resource decisions based on a vision of scale that may not unfold the way we think it will. Now, to be clear, I'm not skeptical about the need for more compute. I'm actually very bullish on it. AI isn't just LLMs. It's deep learning systems, scientific models, robotics, optimization, a whole suite of tools that I think will reshape how we discover, how we invent, and how we integrate clean energy. But headed into the 4th year of this AI race, there is a real tension emerging. There's obviously a question about bubble dynamics, the circular deals, the creative financial instruments, and the exposure of data centers in pension funds and REITs. Those are all starting to worry analysts. If AI revenues don't catch up to AI capex, the whole ecosystem could get wobbly, and that is not a good thing for long-term energy investments. We also have industry leaders publicly questioning whether the scaling laws that justify this entire build-out are actually holding. And we have an electric system preparing for scenarios where these AI companies grow relentlessly, even though no one can say with confidence whether they'll be around in anything like their current form 5 or 10 years from now. So that mismatch between the speed of the AI industry and the longevity of the energy system is one of the defining challenges of this moment. And honestly, the story is nowhere near settled. So that is where my head is on the AI energy nexus headed into next year. And so in this episode, we're featuring some conversations from our Transition AI conference from June with the people who are actually living inside this tension. The ones trying to build projects, secure power, finance new capacity, and make sense of shifting load signals. That is all coming right up after the break.
Next Tracker is now Next Power. As electricity demand surges with AI, data centers, and electrified infrastructure, solar is the only power source that can scale fast enough to meet this moment. Next Power is the revolutionary technology platform ready to deliver it. By designing connected systems that unify the structural, electrical, and digital technologies of a solar power plant, Next Power is enabling smarter, more resilient energy generation that's ready to power our electric future. Powering what's next at nextpower.com.
Open Circuit is brought to you by Natural Power. For nearly 2 decades, Natural Power has provided engineering and consulting services for renewables projects across the U.S. Natural Power supports clients in wind, solar, and battery storage with a focus on independent engineering, technical due diligence, energy estimation, and developer support. With more than 245 gigawatts of project experience in North America and acceptance from major financiers, Natural Power is responsive, able to meet tight timelines, and pragmatic. Natural Power works with you to understand, quantify, and mitigate risks. Learn more at naturalpower.com or click the link in the show notes. So a few months after ChatGPT blew up, we launched our Transition AI conference series. And in those early days, the questions were big and optimistic. How could these tools help operators manage an increasingly complex grid? How could AI speed up clean energy deployment? But over the last couple of years, that tone has shifted a lot. Not because the tech stalled out, but because the energy world ran into the messy part of the story. Utilities have been pretty slow to adopt AI. Interconnection queues have exploded. And the conversation moved from what AI might unlock to the fundamentals of the energy market itself: financing risk, project sequencing, and the growing urgency around planning. And so this week, we have 2 conversations that sit right at the center of that shift. One on how developers and investors are navigating this new landscape, and one on the scramble for firm power that's reshaping resource decisions in real time. And before we get to them, a little housekeeping. We're holding our next Transition AI conference in San Francisco in April 2026. Dates and location are coming very soon, so make sure you're subscribed to Latitude Media's newsletter to get the announcement. We are going to continue to focus on the mechanics of what actually gets built, the risks, the timelines, the planning tools, and the capital structures. Also, if you want a more real-time conversation on those topics, our CEO, Scott Clements, writes a killer newsletter called the AI Energy Nexus. If you're not already subscribed, go fix that. You can find it on LinkedIn or at latitudemedia.com. Just hit the subscribe button. And finally, if you appreciate the depth of these in-person conversations, check out our Power Resilience Forum in Houston, Texas. It's on January 21st through the 23rd. It is going to be loaded with utilities, investors, tech companies, talking about the increasingly urgent question of grid resilience. More at resilience-forum.com. Okay, so now on to our first conversation. This one features a conversation between Scott Clements and Allison Clements and Peter Nulsen. Allison is a former commissioner at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. She now works on data centers and energy. And Peter is a managing director at Generate Capital, who is increasingly financing the clean energy projects that serve digital infrastructure. And this discussion kind of gets to the heart of what's changed right now in this market, the way these projects are financed, and the new risks that come with building power and load at the same time. Here it is.
I left FERC in June, at the end of June of last year, And it was probably about 2 months before that where the data center driven load surge was hitting regulators smack in the face. And I will count myself as one of them who was behind the 8 ball on this. I mean, the pace increased rapidly in a very short period of time, but we were really caught off guard and deer in the headlights. And it just seemed like this is where, if you want to help facilitate the energy transition, this is where you need to be, right? You need to be in this place of helping to solve for this issue. And that's what got me interested in coming over and trying to figure it out. I think it's important to note that there's just so many types of players. You've got the end use customers, you've got the data center developers, you've got the land developers who sell to the data center developers, you've got every flavor and stripe of investor. They want to come in and people willing to give different kinds and different terms and different risks of money. So when we have these conversations, keep in mind that it's not just the utility and the hyperscaler. There's a whole ecosystem of people who sit around in different rooms like this and have these conversations.
Yeah, totally agree. I think for Generate, we first began investing in energy infrastructure in data centers in 2017. The value proposition then, though, was really cost savings and load management. Fast forwarding, let's say, into 2022, 2023, we invested again in infrastructure at data centers, but it became speed to power. And it became connecting data centers to the grid when they otherwise wouldn't be able to connect. So off-grid or bridge power type applications. And so similar technologies as 2017, but a complete new and additional use case for customers, which was super interesting. And I think that's probably the majority of our pipeline on the microgrid side today. The other thing I'd say with respect to Allison's point, completely agree with the idea of kind of coordinating the digital side and the energy side. The complexity is sort of multiplies, right? Because I think anyone who's done a big energy infrastructure project knows it's one thing to do 500 megawatt energy project. It's another thing to build the load at the same time you're building the energy. So now you have a massive data center and a massive energy project. The EPCs, the developers, the sponsors, right? The worst, the investors, and then the tenants, right? The tenant of the data center, who usually is calling all the shots. So if those are separate entities, you're upwards of 7+ entities. And so if we think about like the OpenAI project in Abilene, so you have OpenAI, Crusoe, Blue Owl, Lancium, SoftBank Energy, Oracle, and so on, right? And those are just the names that we know about, right? So I think that the speed to power, which we've talked about all day, and getting folks interconnected in off-grid scenarios is something that we couldn't have imagined 5 years ago. And then in addition, the new complexity of building both at the same time has been a great challenge and opportunity.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm curious how what you're describing with so many different parties having to come together to do this, is that reflected in any way in the capital stack? Is it just debt and equity and different people hold different, or does the capital stack look different? Are there different types of capital in different terms and all that? And how complex does that get? And how much do you have to manage that, or does everybody just bring their lawyers and figure it out?
Yeah, it's definitely in my scope to manage that. I think what's unique here is, first of all, we're very much in the early innings of this, especially with these larger scale projects that have to get built. I think the need for development capital is very essential, especially when you think about large scale projects. I think the standard sort of project finance of tax equity, project debt, and equity is there. I think the thing is you just kind of have parallel capital stacks, because while there are a few cases where you're seeing the same sponsor invest in both the data center and the energy, I think especially when you get to scale, it's the specialists on each side of the equation. And so there's a lot of coordination that goes on there. And that's primarily because folks at that scale typically tend to stick to their own circle of competence and expertise. To your point, a joint venture is a great way to solve that, with a data center sponsor and an energy sponsor coming together, because at the end of the day, one has to, right? The load has to know Jen's going to be there, and Jen has to know load's going to be there. And also it comes down to who's going to wear the risk and of delayed liquidated damages if the data center doesn't show up, or vice versa. So having that type of arm in arm partnership super important.
I am seeing it in some of the transactions I'm in as more sequentially. So you can make money at 3 points. You can make money at the sale of the powered land. You can make money at the sale of Shell Ready, and then you can make money again when you go vertical. And the capital costs involved at the powered land might be $2 to $3 million a megawatt. But the capital costs involved in going vertical might be $12 to $13 million a megawatt. And so there's much more of the Wild West in the early phases of that still. That's where like Uncle Louie is calling up about his potato farm and he wants you to develop a data center. And what we do at ASG is actually diligence all those and we took last year 500 down to 30. That might be good sites for data center development, but there's opportunities for less sophisticated capital and for longer term partnerships between, let's say, commercial real estate holding, companies with real estate portfolios, and it would be and like a Blue Owl, like some sort of fund that is willing to go along across projects with a developer in that sense. When it gets to the end use customer and the going vertical and building the buildings and putting GPU racks in them, that goes to your world out of the early stage stuff.
So maybe let's rank risk a little bit and how you look at this, because now you've added, when you bring these together, the nice thing is it's a bigger project and this is a huge infrastructure project. So the potential is fantastic, but it does feel like those two worlds are separate for a reason. There's different risk profiles for digital and energy infrastructure. So when you go into something in the hundreds of megawatts, what are the risks you're most worried about? And, how do you triage those? Because I think there's so many places to find risk in this right now. AI itself is still in the early stages of proving that it's a long-term economic driver so there's just the overall AI market risk. But then there's all these new exogenous risks like tariffs and supply chain bottlenecks and grid interconnection and local opposition. And it feels like any one of them could sort of knock a project out. So I'm curious, you could take them each on, but how do you think about risk right now, and which ones worry you the most?
In general, Generate is an infrastructure investor. We typically, in the 3 phases that Allison laid out, we are in phase 3, where it's most natural for us to come in at notice to proceed of construction and after, which means that we're used to having all of the permits and the interconnection and the procurement plan pretty well teed up. So when you're building then a data center and an energy project at the same time, the biggest new risk that comes on is ensuring that the data center load will arrive, number one, binary, it will arrive, and number 2, it'll arrive on time. And so what that means is for us to sort of grant notice to proceed, we're looking for an executed customer-tenant agreement between the data center developer and the hyperscaler or the retail customers, right? So that's a new piece that we typically haven't had to go through before. And I think that there's a real, in some parts of the industry, a push to, I think everyone will tell you they're not building on spec, but to avoid building on spec. Unfortunately, it is happening a little bit. And I think for us and for the industry, it's important that we continue to not let the hyperscalers drive too much of the discussion. So I think that's one, is just getting the pieces lined up with respect to the actual tenant contract on time for the when we actually grant notice to proceed of the energy project. The second is what's actually in that contract, right? So a lot of times these hyperscalers, and of course they have very strong reliability needs and requirements themselves. Both the SLAs that are required, can the data center developer meet those? And if they don't meet those, what does it mean for our energy revenue as an infrastructure investor? And then second, what is the term of that contract? What does it look like? And you get to second and third order effects or thoughts around, well, if I need to underwrite my energy asset for 20 years, I need to get comfortable a hyperscaler is going to pay for 20 years. But if they're signing a 5-year contract, okay, now I'm underwriting 3 renewals. And maybe I can underwrite 1 renewal, But 2 or 3, you have to start thinking more. And then it's like, well, if it's a training load versus an inference load, right? Like our view is that training is a little more risky because we're seeing more evolution in how those data centers are being developed and whatnot. And so I think going down there when you're a long-term infrastructure fixed cash flow type investor who's used to let's say a Walmart paying you for 20 years, or that's one of the new ones. So load risk, data center tenant risk, data center contract risk, all of it's manageable. I think it was earlier said today, it's a lot like real estate. That's true. I think it's a little bit new for energy infrastructure investors. And then the last is, if it is an AI load, the credit, right? So having a view on OpenAI, having a view on Anthropic for 20 years, we haven't done a deal on that yet with them as an off-taker, but it's something that we know we'll have to be thinking about.
I think about power all day. So to me, it's the risk of even after it used to be you'd get a will serve letter and everybody was happy and that was that. Will serve letters don't mean anything. The risk that even if you go through the process, you get the study done, you get an electricity service agreement signed up, that you'll still get that power will still be available, and that it will be available in the way that the utility thinks it will be available, in the time frame it will be available. So,
well, let's talk about the speed to power thing being such a priority. It does seem to open up 2 opportunities, and one is it creates a potential price premium, so you can try out things that normally aren't competitive in the traditional market. So novel forms of geothermal or microgrids or fuel cells, hydrogen. There's a lot of things that can find that seem to be getting excited about this because the premium is real, and then there is this urgency around time to power. So I'm curious for you guys, like what you're seeing actually be successful that's novel, that's not just pulling power off the grid or solar and storage and gas. So curious what examples you're seeing and any surprises you've come across so far.
Yeah, anytime anyone says speed to power, I think of this cartoon like Speed to Power, with like this big cloud like superhero. I think actually the speed to power, it increases the exuberance and the froth in the market, but it actually boxes out some of the novel solutions, because in what I'm experiencing at the stages 1 and 2 in this development cycle is that anything that may introduce a new risk, a first of a kind, hasn't happened, a technology that the utility hasn't worked with before, any of that, people want to shy away from. And I was at it's remarkable to me. I was at a conference last week with data center developers who are transacting. We need 300 megawatts in Q3 of 2028, in this buy market. What can you do for me? And there's no conversation about these really great lower emission technologies that ultimately could provide better resilient service than some set of diesel backup generation, or even a singular gas solution. So I think there's opportunity when people like Generate get involved, and the hyperscalers are in it for the whole time. I know that the hyperscalers want to be doing self-build. In a lot of cases, they're not quite there yet, and so you allow this other market to thrive and to continue. And I'm actually discouraged and not encouraged by what that effect is. I don't think that's permanent, or I think we can get over it, but we haven't yet.
So time to power could be to play it safe too. Yeah. And play it safe, unfortunately, often means fossil fuel. Yeah. Peter?
Yeah, I think that was really well said, and I agree with that. I think my experience has been there's a pretty wide gulf between the data center developers and our community of sustainable energy infrastructure today. I think that speed is everything. I think this customer class cares about reliability and 5 nines type of power. Number one, they're used to grid type reliability, and if they can't get it, they will generally seek to achieve it at the closest second form. I think if you step back and you say, okay, what does the data center market and demand look like? We at Generate kind of put it into 2 buckets. One is where there's a load, existing load, and you have to bring gen to the load. And so this is the tier 1, 2, 3 markets, places like Northern Virginia, Silicon Valley, Columbus, Ohio, Dallas, Texas, where will serve letters are being delayed for a long period of time, and folks are saying, bring a base load, highly reliable, looks like the grid asset and commission me today because I have a very valuable piece of land. Maybe I already have a data center on there. I want to develop and build something and, pick a hyperscaler is telling me they want it by first quarter of 2027. In those gen to load scenarios, typically energy footprint constrained, the answer, what we are seeing is the type of off-grid and often natural gas input type resource. Additionally, there's the opportunity where there's a data center that is more flexible in its location. That's where we can bring the actual load to gen. And so that's where we're seeing things like co-locating with existing renewables that are grid tied, or co-locating with new build, what we call energy parks, which solar storage, at times a turbine as well, often grid connected, sometimes not grid connected. And so in those scenarios, those are more geographically flexible loads, often AI training, typically are still being sized for those high reliability 5.9s, but in some cases maybe a little more flexible, maybe like a Bitcoin load or a crypto load or an AI training load. So I think that in the former case, and I don't yet have the numbers on the TAM between those two, but I think in the former case, when you are footprint constrained, you have less flexibility on what you can do. We always first say, okay, how much solar and storage can we put on this site? Or our development partner will say that, right? And then from there, it becomes, maybe this is a good site for a fuel cell, or maybe this is a good site for a rental reciprocating engine for 3 years until the grid can come. And then the last thing I'll say is we're really trying to figure out, and I'm curious if folks please reach out, how we can do integrated on-site power and cooling. And so we can bring the PUEs up, or PUEs way down, efficiencies way up, as opposed to being a 40% reciprocating engine, getting up to the 80, 90% levels to solve those type of problems.
Nextracker is now Nextpower. Electricity demand is surging due to AI, data centers, and electrified infrastructure, and solar is the only power source that can scale fast enough to meet this moment. Nextpower is the revolutionary technology platform ready to deliver it. Born from the leadership of Nextracker, Nextpower provides connected systems that unite the structural, electrical, and digital technology of a utility-scale solar plant. By designing and delivering turnkey integrated systems, Nextpower is accelerating the deployment of reliable energy generation to meet the massive need around the globe. Powering what's next at nextpower.com.
Open Circuit is brought to you by Natural Power. For nearly 2 decades, Natural Power has delivered expert independent engineering and consulting services for renewables projects across the U.S. and beyond. Success in project transactions requires an independent engineer who's laser-focused on timelines, understands the nuances of risk, and collaborates seamlessly to develop solutions tailored to your needs. Natural Power excels at working within tight time constraints while ensuring diligence never takes a back seat. With deep expertise in wind, solar, and battery storage, Natural Power delivers top-tier support in independent engineering, technical due diligence, energy estimation, and developer support. Accepted by major financiers, their flexible approach ensures projects are built on a strong foundation. Powered by expertise, driven by sustainability, that is Natural Power. Find out more at naturalpower.com or click the link in the show notes. Let's move on to our second conversation. One of the central questions of the moment is whether the urgency of load growth will just favor gas or whether it will create room for a suite of emerging clean, firm technologies. And you heard Allison Clements in the previous conversation say that right now, speed to power is favoring fossil fuels. But at the same time, we're seeing a surge of real activity in nuclear, geothermal, and long-duration storage. So we brought together a group of people who are right in the middle of those sectors. Our Latitude reporter, Maeve Alsop, sat down with Mike Kramer from Constellation, who's watching data center demand reshape power sector planning and nuclear investments, Don Owens from Fervo Energy, which is developing next-generation geothermal, and Sam Simmons from Form Energy, which is building multi-day storage for exactly the kind of reliability challenges the grid is now facing. And they walked through what load growth is actually doing to resource decisions and why suddenly their phones are ringing more than ever.
And so, Mike, I want to start with you, because last year you signed a 20-year agreement with Microsoft to power data centers, in part by restarting the remaining reactor at 3 Mile Island. And at the time, a lot of the headlines that I saw, both in B2B energy and elsewhere, were predicting that this deal was going to sort of single-handedly revive nuclear in the country. And so I want to start by having you fill us in. How is the project going? What's happened in the last few months? And how has the broader energy landscape changed since you signed that deal?
Yeah, it's a great question, Maeve. And obviously, a lot's happened since we announced the deal back in September of last year. The project's going very well. We announced back in February that everything is on or ahead of schedule, on or under budget. And the way I break it up is a couple key areas of activity at the site that's really important to us. The first is the hiring effort. Restaffing a nuclear plant's obviously a big effort. We've hired over 300 people out of a total that's closer to 600 at the site, which is ahead of schedule in terms of what we had planned on in order to meet the 2028 delivery year that we had talked about initially. We're in the process of training the reactor operators and the senior reactor operators, which is a long effort, but one that is well underway, and we're excited about the opportunities to get our operators trained and ready to go operate that site. Long lead equipment has been procured, so we have some main power transformers on their way that will help us make sure that we can interconnect the facility and get it started. The interconnection request has been submitted and was part of PJM's Resource Reliability Initiative that went through last month. And then a bunch of other activity continues to go on at the site in terms of inspections of the various different equipment, making sure that everything's in a pristine order. This was one of the best operating facilities in the country before it shut down in 2019. So we intend to bring it back in the same condition or better than where it was before. To continue to operate that site at the 94% plus capacity factor that it was before it shut down back in 2019.
A schedule, not that often that I moderate panels where people are touting that about their projects. So that's amazing.
I didn't want to pick on the earlier presentation where they talked about lead time for refurbishments of nuclear plants and had a 5 to 10 year window there. But we had announced back in September that by 2028, and I'd say we're on or ahead of that schedule. So that's a 4-year window. Hopefully we'll beat it. And I think there's a lot of opportunities when you think about 835 megawatts of clean 24/7 generation coming on within a 5-year window. That's very difficult to do with any other type of technology right now. So really looking forward to that coming back.
Yeah.
And I was there when it shut down. It was obviously a very painful day for the employees, for the industry, and for the country as a whole as it relates to our emissions profile. So bringing it back is a very exciting opportunity for Constellation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to dig into the workforce question a little bit later. But Dawn, Fervo has also had kind of a whirlwind 12 months. One thing that I really want to dig into that Caroline Golan alluded to, she was up here earlier for the episode of Open Circuit, some big updates with your clean transition tariff, the sort of first of a kind financing structure that you've worked on with Google and with NV Energy. Can you give us sort of the foundational overview of the CTT? What do we all need to know to have a conversation about it? And what are your learnings? I think it was recently approved by regulators. So what are your top takeaways now?
Yeah, I would absolutely love to. Okay, so for those that don't know, the Clean Transition Tariff is a tariff that allows customers, hyperscalers or others, direct load customers, to contract directly with a gen provider and go through the utility or the municipality and not have any adverse impact to ratepayers. So it's actually a vital part of accelerating the clean energy transition. If you want to use clean firm power, it's also a vital part of, I think, having transmission and data center providers take back a little bit of the power of speed to deployment. And it was recently approved by the California PUC. It really is just a rate structure. And so what have I learned? I've learned that you can actually power the AI revolution with clean firm power, and you can do it within the market rules of today. But to do that, it requires a lot of innovation and some creativity, and truthfully, a lot of trust. So what we were able to do was bring not only ourselves, but Google's regulatory team, as well as the NV Energy's regulatory team together, and kind of revise live a tariff structure that wasn't actually that new. NV Energy had something like this, a draft of this on the books that they were working on for, I don't know, 5 to 7 years, but they couldn't quite figure out this last piece of how do we make sure that the transmission part of this doesn't adversely impact ratepayers. And they'd always kind of gotten hung up on that. And so we were able to sort of like sit down with in true third-party conversations with them and kind of hash that out. It was recently approved, and it has allowed us to really take the learnings that we had from our first commercial project with Google, where they helped enable and show that EGS is ready now, to the next level and have a full commercial scale of 115 megawatts that will be online by 2030. So in short, that it's an enabling tariff structure that I think, honestly, every IOU should be looking at to repeat if they want to make sure that they are providing the power that they need now for clean firm without impacting their ratepayers.
And just quickly before we move on, what do conversations about replicating this structure look like? What can you share?
They need to look like the load, the person who needs the power needs to come together with the people who are developing the power, us, and they need to sit in a room with their rate structure folks at the IOU. There's really no other way to do it. That's the way it has to happen.
It's also been a huge year for Form, and I had a really hard time narrowing down what I was going to ask you about in this first question, not least because we've actually got 2 Latitude Media podcast episodes about Form that everybody should go listen to. But there's lots of updates there, including that at the end of last year, you raised, I believe it was a $400 million Series F. There were a couple of DOE awards that I saw in there in your press room. And of course, you've been vastly expanding your manufacturing footprint. So can you start just by telling us a little bit about what your pipeline looks like right now, how big it is, who's in it, what are the kind of biggest projects on your horizon right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, building American battery manufacturing is expensive. So that's why we have a lot of money coming in from a lot of different sources. But that manufacturing pipeline is obviously supporting a bunch of projects. I mean, I think when I think of our pipeline, there's fundamentally, the last 12 months hasn't changed the nature of the pipeline that much. What Form Energy makes is a multi-day storage battery, which is a way to provide firm capacity. And the need for firm capacity is obviously growing because of AI, but it existed before. It existed because of EVs, it existed because of heat pumps, it existed because just people need power. And so the fundamentals of the need for firm power haven't meaningfully changed. They're getting bigger and faster, but not a fundamental shift. And so a lot of our pipeline looks the same. It's utilities. It's, a lot of the AI load growth, you're seeing it through utilities. And then we work with developers and IPPs to support those and to go work in wholesale markets. I think, to be honest, one of the big things that has changed about how we view our commercial pipeline is the CTT that Fervo did, because it is an enabling, not a technology, but enabling regulatory structure that benefits, I think, us all.
Next question make less sense, but kind of a fun one that I wanted to throw in, and maybe Sam, yours is a conversation with utilities. But I'd love for you to share, if you can remember, the specific conversation or meeting or time period, I imagine this is before this year, when you and your company first started to realize that the data center industry or the AI boom might be one of the biggest market factors driving your growth.
I can start. It was just over a year and a half ago. At Constellation, we started extensive efforts in working with the data companies. We had a lot of insights into the activities that were going on there from our existing commercial relationships. We're a power supplier of 3/4 of the Fortune 100. And so we talked to all those folks on a regular basis to understand their power needs, and certainly saw those continue to increase. And then the additional part of it was them looking to build their own data centers. So obviously the developers had been doing a lot of that. Seeing the hyperscalers get into the build question was really one that we started to explore pretty extensively, I guess, about a year and a half ago. I think it's really important to note that this industry changes very frequently. I think you've heard that throughout the presentations today. It is not static. It is very dynamic. The way in which the activities occur and how these power solutions are going to come about will continue to morph. So I think it's one of those where we've been trying to stay ahead of the game, understand what's going on the customer side, understand understand what's going on the developer side, and really think through these power solutions, specifically as it relates to nuclear. And I know we talked about 3 Mile Island. I'll try not to monopolize the time, but it's really important when we think about what are the solutions needed for these data centers. There is a firm, clean power need there. And just understanding how you meet that with the different types of technologies that are available, nuclear is a really good fit. 24/7, has the emissions profile. You can scale it. Building new has some challenges, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I think there's the opportunities to add resources to include the existing and factor in the fact that these existing plants have relicensing periods that end. And so to the extent you can extend them like we did at Clinton with the Meta deal, you're really starting to see real impacts on the system for an extended period of time.
Okay, my answer to this, I have two. I have a personal and I have a professional. So the professional was actually all the way back in 2021. In our early conversations with Google and Adam Forney, I was having a conversation with him, and we were talking about what happens next after we did our GETA, this geothermal acceleration development agreement that helped enable our technology. And we were talking about our future pipeline, Fervo's future pipeline, and what were things we're going to, what interest Google had in the future pipeline. And I could not quite rectify what I was hearing from them with what was, what I was hearing and seeing from just what I could know publicly about what Google was interested in. So I had this sneaking suspicion. I'm like, what is going on? I am missing something. Why are you so interested in this? So that was my professional, first tip off. My personal tip off was, it's kind of professional as well. I was actually trying to hire someone for a project manager role at Fervo, and I will not reveal the person, but I could not get this person interested because of they were skilled at developing data centers and hyperscaling facilities, and I could not get this person to call me back. And I'm like, what is a good friend? And I'm like, what is going on? Why are you not doing this? So that was in 2023. So, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, I won't claim that we saw ChatGPT coming before anyone else did. So I think we felt that chaos of that, holy crap, what is this thing and what's it going to do to the world? And then I think, we're a venture-backed company. So I think push really came to shove when our investors started calling us and be like, hey, there's a lot of money here. And and it really changed the conversation around scaling quickly and the market potential and how do you deploy, less incrementally. And because as a technology company, the typical thing is to go in increments, right? We have a 1.5 megawatt project coming online later this year. That's our first one. Then 10 megawatts. And then you start to get to the grid scale. And it's well, people want gigawatts of this and they wanted it yesterday. And so we started feeling calls from investors who were feeling calls from utilities, and utilities directly saying hey, can I get hundreds of megawatts of this stuff next year? I'm no, we just broke ground on a factory. We can't. And so I think that was the wake-up call that really drove a huge acceleration at the company.
You've outlined some of the challenges, but you also just mentioned expanding more quickly than planned. Are there certain, whether it's tech challenges or market challenges, that the AI boom, people are probably very sick of that term by the end of the day, that has smoothed over for you? Are there roadblocks that the massive demand that you're now seeing is helping clear the way for you to grow more quickly, to raise more money?
The first thing that comes to mind is just the conversation has shifted. I mean, when we started trying to sell multi-day storage and talking about firm capacity and LCOE is not a good metric because it doesn't value different hours and that sort of thing. And what does it mean to be firm? We were yelling into a void. And what I think this has done is everyone is now focused on what does it mean to be firm? How do I deliver firm capacity? And as when you're a 100-hour battery and you're competing against 4 and 8 hour storage, a lot of times, that's where the difference lies, is in how firm you are. And so that conversation, changing the awareness of what it means to be firm, I think has been a huge change for us.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that. I think I stopped talking about do I have cost parity with solar plus a 4-hour battery to the speed of deployment of my pipeline. So I'd answer that question in it did help. It helped me no longer have to stay have all these silly examples. I was trying to in panels like this talk about what does FERC mean? If you want to smell nice for 4 hours versus smelling nice all day long, you buy the more expensive perfume versus the other, but Axe body spray. I had to make this point over and over again. I stopped having to use that example. But the other thing that it helped me do was it helped me get in the room and have creative conversations, both with off-takers about early funding, as well as with some of the finance community. We're more willing to come to the table and have conversations with me about, okay, we are a new technology, but what do you need to see to show that I am bankable? And I think that's 100% driven by what they're seeing in the projections on spending from hyperscalers and large AI providers. I don't at all pretend that I was able to do that. They started taking our calls.
For me, it's twofold. One is less on the demand side, but more on the urgency side. And as you think about it, we have to meet this moment. And, we heard a little bit about this earlier, Jigger's comments aside, how important it is for us to win the AI race, national security, economic transformation, all the things that Stephen mentioned that we can potentially accomplish with AI. And I think everybody is on that same page that we really need to be the winner here. We can't just sit back, let other countries take over the AI conversation. And so that develops a sense of urgency in terms of how you can get things done. Now, does that actually get policies in place and the results that you need? That's what we're working on. But that sense of urgency, the need to meet the moment, I think is driving a lot of the conversation, Maeve. And then the second thing is it puts more options on the table. Restarting a nuclear plant is not something that people thought was feasible 2 years ago. And now we're doing that, and we're not the only ones. Adding new nuclear at certain places and making sure the existing have 20-year license lives, not something that people were looking at. We'll buy your power for 2 years, not for 20, 2 years ago. And now you have 20-year PPAs being signed that keep these units around for a long time. And then the ability to add the new nuclear question is one we have to find an answer to. And so how do you pair these different types of products together? So you have existing taken care of, you add some new with upgrades and restarts, you think about where you can do new build on the nuclear side, and you accelerate the technology development going from first of a kind to nth of a kind because of this level of urgency. So it all kind of pairs together. It works really well. And I think it's something that probably wouldn't happen if you didn't have that sense of urgency and the amount of demand that you're talking about.
I also, just to add one more thing, I do feel like, I don't know if I just certainly didn't mention it, but it is real. It creates economic white space, right? Before we were talking to technology providers about, clean, firm, 24/7 power, and the willingness to pay a premium was that. Yeah, we want it. It's yeah, but you want it at the same price. And now there's a willingness to pay for it, right? I don't know, you probably know this better, but what did a nuclear plant just contract at $80 a megawatt hour or something?
That's the analysts. They didn't disclose the terms on that deal that Alan did with Susquehanna, but that's the analyst estimate. Just a minor correction. When you say premium, it's paying for the attributes, right? The attributes that these types of generation sources provide, the firm, the reliable, the clean, I think is really important because that is something that has value that hasn't been accommodated by the market before. And now you're seeing the market start to value that and price that into some of the deals.
Oh my gosh, I could not agree more with that, honestly. I feel like we've been trying to talk about the marginal value for so long, and that was our way and our method to try and say, no, these are the valuation of the unseen things, the things you're not actually valuing. And from our perspective, just to bring it back to your question, Maeve, we ended up seeing that people now are valuing that somewhere between $15 and $20 per megawatt hour. They finally gotten that is actually the value of that capacity factor of the clean firm.
My very last question for all of you, sort of a fun, quick hit question. If there was one thing we could do tomorrow that would make it easier to build new clean firm power, what would it be? And for reference, on a panel a couple of weeks ago, I asked a similar question to a data center developer. How could we build data centers faster in Phoenix? And his fun answer was fly several helicopters full of cash over Phoenix and drop the cash out over the city. So if that's where you want to go with this, I give you full permission. Sam?
I feel like the right answer is like put a copper plate everywhere so you can just but like then we'd all be electrocuted. So I'm still figuring out the logistics of that.
TSA pre-check for firm clean power. That's my answer. I travel a lot.
I actually think there's two. The first is policy certainty, and that's the answer I gave on a similar panel question last week. And that sounds very generic, but the idea is you're making investments in 60, 80, 100-year type assets, and not knowing what's going to happen 10 years from now makes it very difficult. And you can get offtake agreements that go out 5, 10, 15, 20 years. But the idea is we want this to be a long-term investment that serves the people and the grid and the data centers and everybody else for an extended period of time. And so if you don't have that policy certainty, it's very difficult. And the second one is just the spamming of the interconnection queue is something that just, it is a prerequisite for any of these projects to get off the ground. They have to go through that process. But there's so much noise in those numbers that makes policymakers and regulators very uncomfortable. And I think we all know that that's not the right number. There's definitely demand out there, but making it at scales of 30 gigawatts instead of 5 causes all sorts of problems in terms of the planning process that we can't solve easily on our own.
So you like my TSA for pre-check?
I do, actually.
And my copper plate idea.
I know.
We're a team here.
We're a team.
Mike's got a message. He's sticking to it. Thank you so much. Really, really great conversation.
That's going to do it. Catherine and Jigger will be back with me next week. Stay tuned for more details on Transition AI 2026 in San Francisco in April. And get your pass to the Power Resilience Forum for January in Houston, Texas. Of course, subscribe to this podcast anywhere you get your shows. And if you like what we're doing here, please give us a rating and review. Open Circuit is produced by Latitude Media. I am Stephen Lacey, your host and executive editor at Latitude. The show is edited by me. Sean Marquand is our technical director. Ann Bailey is our senior podcast editor. And we will catch you all next week. Thanks for being here.